So, a really, really long time ago, way before anyone else, some people showed up in America. They were the first ones ever to live here. These people are called the Paleo Indians. That's just the name scientists use for them. It means old Indians. They weren't so different from people today, you know? Just people. But they lived a super long time back, and life was totally different then. Really hard, probably. Everything was way more basic. Where did they come from? Well, they walked. They came all the way from Asia. Think about where Russia is now. That general area. They walked for ages, probably following animals or just looking for somewhere better. Back then, something weird was going on with the land and the water. The place where there's water now, between Alaska and Russia, that spot called the Bering Strait, back then it wasn't water. It was dry land, solid ground, a big bridge of land, basically. Because so much water was frozen up in giant ice sheets called glaciers, so these people just walked right across that land. It was cold, really cold, like Ice Age cold. Not fun walking weather, for sure. But they did it. They kept going. Eventually, they got to Alaska. Alaska was the first place they hit in America. Still pretty cold and icy up there back then. Not exactly the best spot to stop. So they kept moving. They wanted to go south. South is usually warmer, right? Makes sense. They wanted to get away from all that ice. There were basically two ways they could go south from Alaska. One way was along the edge of the big ocean, the Pacific Ocean, walking right by the water. That way probably had stuff like shellfish to eat, maybe fish, seaweed, birds, things like that. Maybe they even had simple boats, but probably not big ones, just something to help along the shore. The other way was inland. Later on, when things warmed up a tiny bit, a path opened up between two huge walls of ice that covered most of Canada, like a hallway through the ice. Some groups took that path inside the land, walking through valleys between giant ice mountains. That must have felt strange. Either way, coastal or inland, it took a long, long time. Generations, probably. Kids were born, people got old, all while they were slowly moving south, step by step, year by year. What did they do once they got further into America? Same thing people everywhere did back then. Looked for food. All day, probably. That was the main job. Food. They hunted animals. Big animals, mostly. Really big ones that we don't even have anymore. Like mammoths. Think of an elephant, but hairy and huge. Or giant sloths. Big, slow-moving things. Or huge bison. Hunting those wasn't easy. Probably pretty dangerous. They used spears, not fancy metal spears. Spears made of wood with sharp stone points tied on the end. They made these points out of rock, chipping away pieces until they got a sharp edge. The most famous kind of point is called a Clovis point. They found a bunch of them first near Clovis, New Mexico, so that's the name. But they made other kinds too. Besides hunting, they also gathered stuff. Whatever they could find that was safe to eat. Berries sometimes. Roots dug up from the ground. Nuts. Seeds. Maybe eggs from birds' nests. Whatever was around. They moved around a lot, probably. Following the animals they hunted, or going where the plants were growing. They didn't stay in one place for years like people do now. They set up camp, stayed a while, then packed up and moved on when the food got scarce or the seasons changed. Their stuff was simple. Stone tools, mostly. Sharp knives for cutting. Scrapers for cleaning hides. Maybe drills for making holes. Things like that. Wood and leather stuff rots away. so we mostly just find the stone parts now. Their camps weren't fancy houses, maybe simple shelters made of branches and hides, or sleeping under rock overhangs, just enough to get out of the weather. Life was simple: find food, eat, make tools, move, find more food, try not to get hurt, raise the kids. That was pretty much it, day after day. Nothing exciting, just surviving. Year after year. Generation after generation. Slowly spreading out across this huge new land they found. Just people, walking around, looking for something to eat in a very big, very empty place. Life for these Paleo-Indian people was pretty basic. It wasn't easy. Every day was mostly about one thing: finding enough food. That's what everything else was about. They didn't have stores, no farms, no refrigerators, just whatever they could get from the land around them. Hunting was a big deal, but hard work. They went after those huge animals like mammoths and giant bison. Taking down something that big probably took a lot of people working together. It was dangerous. A mammoth could crush you easy. They used spears with those sharp stone points, like the Clovis ones. Sometimes they maybe used a special stick called an atlatl to throw the spear harder and farther. Like a stick that gives your arm extra power. Made hunting a bit easier maybe, but still tough. They also hunted smaller stuff when they could. Deer, rabbits, birds, whatever they could catch. Smaller game was safer and maybe more common later on. But hunting wasn't the only way to eat. They gathered stuff too. A lot of stuff. This was probably how they got food most days, honestly. Hunting big animals wasn't an everyday thing, so they looked for plants. Women and kids probably did a lot of this, digging up roots and tubers from the ground, picking berries when they were in season, collecting nuts like acorns or walnuts, finding seeds from wild grasses, maybe even grabbing insects or grubs sometimes. Whatever didn't poison you and filled your belly. They knew which plants were good and which were bad. That knowledge was super important. Passed down from older people to kids. They moved around a lot. They weren't like people today who live in one house for years. They were nomads. That just means they moved from place to place. Why? Because food ran out. Animals moved away. Seasons changed. Berries stopped growing in one spot. So they packed up their stuff and walked somewhere else. They followed the animals they hunted. They went where plants were growing good. Maybe they knew certain spots were better at certain times of year. They traveled light. You can't carry a ton of stuff when you walk everywhere. Their camps weren't fancy. When they stopped, they made simple shelters. Maybe just a lean-to. Some branches leaned against a rock or a log, covered with animal hides or big leaves. Sometimes they used natural places, like caves or big rock overhangs, to get out of the rain or wind or cold. They didn't build houses, just temporary places to sleep and stay dry for a little while. They had fires, for sure. Fire kept them warm, cooked their food, scared away animals at night, and gave them light. Making fire was a big skill. They made tools, but only from stuff they found, mostly stone. They were really good at hitting rocks together to make sharp edges. They made spear points, of course, but also other things. Scrapers for cleaning animal hides, turning a rough skin into softer leather for clothes or shelter covers. Knives for cutting meat or plants. Maybe little drills for making holes in wood or bone or leather. Sometimes they used bone or antler pieces for tools too. Wood was probably used a lot, for spear shafts, digging sticks, maybe bowls. But wood rots away fast, so we don't find much of it now. Just the stone parts last. What about clothes? Well, it was cold sometimes, especially early on. They probably wore clothes made from animal skins, hides cleaned and maybe softened, tied together with strips of leather or plant fibers. Simple stuff. Just enough to keep warm, maybe some fur for extra warmth. Footwear? Probably simple leather wraps or moccasins, something like that. Nothing fancy. Life was small group life. They probably lived in bands, small groups of families, maybe 20 or 30 people, sometimes more, sometimes less, traveling together, helping each other hunt, helping watch the kids, sharing food. It was safer together, easier to survive. They probably knew other groups, maybe met up with them sometimes at good spots, traded things, shared news, found partners for their kids. But mostly, it was their own little band, day in, day out. Kids learned by doing, watching the adults, helping with gathering, practicing making little tools, learning how to track animals, learning which plants were food. There wasn't school, just life. Getting older meant taking on more jobs, hunting for the men, gathering and making things for the women. Old people were important because they remembered things, where to find water in a dry time, how to treat a sickness, stories about the past. It was a simple life, but a hard one. Food wasn't always easy to find. Getting hurt or sick was bad news. No doctors. Bad weather could make things miserable. Animals could be dangerous. Babies and old people probably died more often than they do now. But they kept going. They did what they had to do to live in this big new land, day after day, year after year, slowly spreading out. Just living. Time passed. A lot of time. Thousands of years, actually. Things slowly changed for the Paleo-Indian people. The world around them didn't stay the same. Remember those giant ice sheets covering so much land? They melted, more and more over time. The weather overall got warmer. Places that used to be frozen and bare became covered in forests or wide grasslands. The sea levels also rose because of all the melted ice. That old land bridge they walked across from Asia, it got covered by water, completely gone. No more walking back that way for anyone. The biggest change for them was probably the animals. Those huge animals they used to rely on for hunting, like the mammoths and the giant ground sloths and the really massive types of bison. Most of them disappeared, died out, gone forever. Why? Well, the changing weather probably messed up the places they needed to live and the plants they needed to eat. And maybe, just maybe, people hunting them so much over a long time didn't help either. It got harder and harder to find these giant animals. Then it became impossible. So hunting those giants stopped. That was a huge change. They had to completely change how they found their food. No more big mammoth hunts. So what did they do instead? They started hunting smaller animals way more. Animals like deer became really important. Rabbits, birds, maybe fish and turtles became a bigger part of their meals. They also probably spent even more time gathering plants, roots, berries, nuts, and seeds than before. They got really good at using all kinds of smaller animals and all sorts of plants. They had to adapt to survive. Their tools changed a bit too. Those famous Clovis spear points? You saw them less and less. People started making different styles of stone points, maybe better suited for going after deer or rabbits or used with different throwing sticks. Life still meant moving around following food, but maybe the routes changed with where the new animals lived and where the good plants grew. How do we even know all this stuff about people who lived so incredibly long ago? We don't have any of their stories written down. No pictures they drew. We know because of archaeology. That just means people digging carefully in the dirt, layer by layer, looking for old things left behind. They find stuff. Mostly stone tools, because stone lasts. Those spear points, scrapers for hides, knives for cutting. Finding a Clovis point tells us they were in that spot a very long time ago. Finding different points later tells us things changed over time. Sometimes, very rarely, they find other things. Animal bones with cut marks from stone tools. Clear proof they hunted and ate that animal. Even rarer, they find actual footprints pressed into mud that later turned hard as rock, like at White Sands in New Mexico. That's amazing. Like seeing exactly where someone stepped thousands of years ago. They also find places where these people camped briefly. Old fire pits, called hearths. Maybe piles of stone chips left over from making tools. Places like Cooper's Ferry in Idaho or sites near Clovis in New Mexico give us important clues about where they lived and what they did. The weather getting warmer wasn't all bad news. More places became good for living. Forests grew thicker. Grasslands spread wider. There were more areas with plants to gather and animals to hunt. So, the Paleo-Indian people, and their children, and their children's children, just kept spreading out. They went further south, all the way down through what's now Mexico. They filled up more of North America. Some groups probably even went way down into South America over a long, long time. The land wasn't empty anymore like it was at the very start. More and more little groups of people were living scattered across different spots. So, what finally happened to the Paleo-Indian people? Did they just vanish one day? They didn't disappear. They were still here. But their way of life, the specific Paleo-Indian way, slowly changed over hundreds and hundreds of years. As the big Ice Age animals vanished completely, and the weather settled into something closer to today's, they had to adjust more. Their tools kept changing shape and style. How they lived, how they got food, maybe even how their family groups were set up, shifted bit by bit. The old Paleo-Indian style faded away. New ways of doing things emerged slowly. Different regional styles of tools and living appeared across the huge continent. The people who came after, living in these different ways across America, the many groups we later called different tribes or nations, they were all the descendants of those first Paleo-Indians. Their kids' kids' kids, way, way down the line. Scientists can even see this connection now in a different way, through DNA. By studying the genes from very old bones they find, when they are incredibly lucky, and comparing them to the genes of modern Native American people, they see the direct link. The story is written right there in the genes. The first people who walked into America are the ancestors of the Native American people living here today. They are their great, 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 add a whole lot more greats, grandparents. That family connection goes way, way back to those first small groups crossing the old land bridge and slowly spreading out across two huge continents. So the time we call Paleo-Indian ended. But the people didn't stop. They became the next people, who became the next people after that, all the way down to the present. They were the very beginning. So, these Paleo-Indian people lived a long, long time ago. Really long. Why do we even care about them now? What's the point? Well, it's simple. They were the first. The very first people to ever set foot in America and make it their home. Before them, no humans lived here. That's kind of a big deal, even if it was way back when. We know about them because of the stuff they left behind. Not much, but enough. Mostly stones. Those stone tools, especially the spear points, are like little messages from the past. When someone finds a Clovis point sticking out of the dirt, it tells us, hey, people were here, and it was a really long time ago. Finding different kinds of points later tells us things changed slowly over time. It's not exciting like finding gold, but it tells a story. The story of how people lived here first. The places where they lived, even just for a little while, are important spots now. Places where archaeologists dig carefully. Spots like that place in New Mexico with the old footprints, white sands. Or Cooper's Ferry in Idaho where they found really old tools. Or near Clovis, New Mexico, where they found lots of those special points. These places are like markers on a map showing where the first people walked and camped. Digging there tells us more about what they ate, what animals were around, and how they made their tools. It's slow work, looking at dirt and rocks, but it adds pieces to the puzzle. Another big reason they matter is who came after them. They didn't just vanish, they were the start. Over thousands and thousands of years, their way of life slowly changed. The big animals were gone. The weather was different. So their kids and their kids' kids had to live differently. They hunted different animals, gathered different plants, made slightly different tools, moved around in different patterns, slowly, very slowly, all across the huge land. New ways of living popped up. Different groups in different places started doing things their own way. But all these later people, the ones we call different Native American tribes, they all came from those first Paleo-Indians. It's like a family tree. The Paleo-Indians are the very first roots, the start of the whole thing. Scientists can even see this family connection in a different way now. They look at DNA, the stuff inside our bodies that makes us who we are. By carefully studying tiny pieces of very old bones, when they find any, and comparing it to the DNA of Native American people alive today, they see the link. It matches. The first people who walked into America are the ancestors of all the Native American people. It's a direct line. That connection in the blood goes back thousands of years to those small groups crossing the land bridge and spreading out. So knowing about the Paleo-Indians helps us understand where Native American people originally came from, long, long ago. Their story is also a story about change. The world changed around them. The ice melted, the big animals died, and they had to change how they lived to survive. They adapted. They figured out new ways to find food and make tools. They kept going. That's a pretty basic human story, really. Things change. People figure it out. It happened way back then, too. Finally, they matter because they were explorers. Not like explorers with ships and maps, but they walked into a totally new place. A huge, empty continent, for people anyway. They didn't know what was out there. They just kept going south, finding new rivers, new mountains, new valleys, filling up the land, bit by bit, generation by generation. That took a long time and a lot of walking. They were the first to see these places, the first to live in them. That makes them the original pioneers of America, even if nobody wrote it down at the time. So yeah, they lived simply a long time ago, just looking for food, making tools, moving camp, nothing fancy. But by being the first, by leaving a few stone clues, and by being the ancestors of everyone who came after, they earned their spot in the story. They are the beginning chapter of the long, long history of people living in the Americas. That's why we talk about the Paleo-Indians. They started it all. The time of the Paleo-Indians didn't last forever. Nothing does. Slowly, over many, many generations, things changed. Their way of life, focused on those big hunts and constant moving, faded away. But they didn't just disappear. They became something else. The story moved on. The biggest reason for the change was simple. The world got different. The weather warmed up a lot more. The giant ice sheets kept melting, shrinking back north. Forests grew thicker and spread out wider. Big open grasslands covered more land. The huge animals they used to hunt, like the mammoths and giant sloths, were gone for good. You couldn't find them anymore. So the old ways of hunting them didn't work. They had to find new ways to live. People adapted. They always do. Hunting didn't stop, but it changed. Instead of focusing on rare giant animals, they hunted smaller things much more. Deer became really important. So did rabbits, birds, turkeys, maybe fish and turtles. They got better at trapping smaller animals too. Gathering plants became even more crucial. People learned more about the nuts, seeds, roots, and berries all around them. They might have started to pay more attention to where certain plants grew well each year. Maybe they even helped some good plants grow a little, though they weren't farming like we think of it yet. Life was still about moving around, but maybe they stayed in one good spot a bit longer if there was plenty of food there. Their tools showed the change. Those special Clovis spear points, people made them less and less. They started making different kinds of stone points. Maybe smaller points better for deer or birds. Maybe points shaped differently for new ways of throwing the spear. Other tools changed too. Maybe they made more baskets for gathering nuts and berries. Maybe they made better grinding stones for crushing seeds. Things shifted slowly to fit the new foods they relied on. As the land changed, more places became easier to live in. The people spread out even further, filling in the spaces. But with more people in more places, and different plants and animals in different areas, groups started doing things their own way. What worked well near the coast might be different from what worked inland. What worked in the forests might be different from the grasslands. So slowly, the very old Paleo-Indian style, which was pretty similar across the board early on, started to break up. Different areas saw different kinds of tools and maybe different habits. The one big early way of life was turning into many smaller, more regional ways. The small family groups, the bands, were probably still the main way people lived. But maybe as they stayed in certain areas longer, they got to know the land better. They learned the best spots for certain plants each season, the best places to find deer, the good fishing holes. This deeper knowledge of a smaller area started to develop. They were putting down roots in a way, even if they still moved around within their familiar territory. So what do we call the people after the Paleo-Indian time? Scientists have different names for the next long period, like the Archaic period. But that's just a label. The important thing is that these were the same people, just their grandkids and great-grandkids living differently. They were the direct descendants. The Paleo-Indians didn't vanish. They slowly turned into the next generations who lived across America for thousands more years before Europeans showed up. The people who became the many, many different Native American tribes and nations all trace their family lines back to those first Paleo-Indians who walked into the empty continent. We know this connection is real. Scientists can look at DNA, the tiny instructions inside our cells that we get from our parents. By studying bits of bone from very old sites, when they're really lucky and find some, and comparing it to DNA from modern Native American people, they see the match. It lines up. The first people are the ancestors. It's a direct family line stretching back over thousands of years. The places where Paleo-Indians lived are still important. Archaeologists keep looking. They dig at sites like Meadowcroft in Pennsylvania, or Deborah L. Friedkin in Texas, or the famous Clovis spots. They find those old stone tools, sometimes bones, sometimes ancient campfire ashes. Each find, even a small stone chip, adds a tiny piece to the story. It tells us where they went, roughly when they were there, and what they might have been doing. It's slow work, like putting together a giant puzzle with most of the pieces missing. But every bit helps. So, the Paleo-Indian time ended. It was the very first chapter. It closed because the world changed. The big animals vanished, and people had to change with it. But the people themselves kept going. They adapted. They learned new ways. They spread out. They became the foundation for everything that came after in the long history of people living in the Americas. Their story is the story of starting out in a huge, new, and often tough land. They were the first ones to figure it out. And then, slowly, they moved on to the next thing. The end of their beginning was just the start of everything else. We know about these really old people, the Paleo-Indians, because of things they left behind. Not a lot, but some stuff. Mostly it's stones. Stones they changed to make useful things. Finding this stuff is like finding little clues about their lives, long, long ago. The most famous things they left are their spear points, especially the kind called Clovis points. People find these points sticking out of dirt or buried in creek banks, or when digging in certain places. Finding a Clovis point tells us one big thing. People were here a super long time ago. It's like a sign saying, we lived here way back. Later on, people made different kinds of points. Finding those different points tells us time passed and things changed. They were probably hunting different animals or trying new ways. But they left more than just spear points. They made other stone tools too. Things like scrapers. These were probably for cleaning animal hides, making the skins softer for clothes or shelter. They made knives for cutting meat or plants. Sometimes little drills for making holes. They made tools out of bone or antler too, but those don't last as long as stone, so we find them less often. Finding these tools shows they knew how to work with what they had. Sometimes, very rarely, they find other things. Bones, but not just any bones. Animal bones that have cut marks on them. Marks made by stone knives or tools. This is proof they hunted and ate that animal. finding bones of a mammoth with cut marks. That means they really did hunt those giants. Finding bones of deer or rabbits tells us they ate smaller stuff too. Even rarer than bones? Footprints. Yeah, actual footprints. Like at White Sands in New Mexico. Long ago, people walked on soft ground near a lake, their feet pressed into the mud. Then, over a super long time, that mud turned hard like stone. Now scientists find those footprints perfectly preserved. It's amazing. Like seeing exactly where someone stepped thousands and thousands of years ago. You can see if they were walking or running, maybe even if kids were playing. They also find places where these people camped. Not houses, just spots they stayed for a little while. How do they know it was a camp? They find old fire pits, places where they made a fire to cook food or stay warm. The ash and burned wood and rocks are still there. Sometimes they find piles of stone chips. This is the leftover stuff from when they were making their stone tools, chipping away at rocks to make points or knives. Finding these chips means someone sat right there and made tools. Important places where they find a lot of this stuff have names now, like Meadowcroft in Pennsylvania, or Deborah L. Friedkin in Texas, or of course near Clovis, New Mexico. These spots are like little windows into the past. Scientists dig there very carefully, layer by layer, like peeling back pages in a book. Each layer is from a different time. Finding stuff deep down means it's older. Finding stuff higher up means it's younger. This helps figure out roughly when people were there. Putting all this stuff together, the points, the tools, the bones, the footprints, the camp spots, tells a story. A simple story, but important. It tells us these people were here. It tells us roughly when they arrived and started spreading out. It tells us what they ate. Big animals at first, then more smaller stuff and plants. It tells us they moved around a lot, setting up camp, making tools, having a fire, then moving on. It tells us they were smart and knew how to make what they needed from stones and bones. Finding this stuff isn't easy. It takes a long time. Scientists dig slowly, carefully. They sift through dirt. They take notes on everything. It's not like the movies. It's slow, careful work. Most of the time, they don't find anything super exciting. Maybe just a stone chip or a tiny piece of bone. But even small things add up. Each little find is another piece of the puzzle, a puzzle about the very first people in America. Why keep looking? Because every little bit helps us understand the beginning. How people first lived here, how they survived, how they changed over time. The stones, the bones, the footprints. They are the only voices left from that super long ago time. They tell the story when no one wrote anything down. They are the proof that the Paleo-Indians were here, starting it all. Digging in the dirt helps us hear that old, old story. Okay, so these Paleo-Indian people, they lived a crazy long time ago. We're talking way, way back, before pretty much anything else we know about in America. It feels like ancient history, stuff lost in the fog. But here's the thing. They didn't just poof disappear. Their story, in a real way, connects straight to people walking around today, especially to Native American folks. How does that work? It's actually pretty simple when you get down to it. The Paleo-Indians were their ancestors, like their super, super old-time grandparents. The absolute beginning of the family line over here. Think about your own family tree. Way down at the very bottom roots. That's where the Paleo-Indians sit for Native American people. Then, over thousands upon thousands of years, like more years than anyone can really picture, things happened slowly. Kids were born, grew up, had their own kids. Life shifted bit by tiny bit. Those giant animals everyone used to hunt, gone for good. The weather settled into something different. So naturally, how people lived had to change too. They started hunting different animals, smaller stuff like deer and rabbits. They gathered different kinds of plants and roots, learning what worked where. The tools they made shifted shape a little. Maybe groups started hanging around certain good spots for longer stretches, if the food was steady. And because America is huge, groups way up north started doing things differently than groups way down south, or groups near the ocean compared to groups deep inland. This all happened incredibly slowly, over more generations than anyone could count. This slow change, taking forever, eventually led to the many, many different Native American tribes and nations that were living all across North and South America for thousands of years, before any Europeans showed up in their big ships. All those different groups, each with their own languages, their own ways of doing things, their own stories and traditions, they all trace their family lines right back to those same first people who walked into this empty continent over the dry land bridge way back when. It's one enormous, unbroken family chain stretching back into the deep past. The Paleo-Indians are the very first link in that chain, the starting point. Scientists have a pretty neat way to actually see this connection now, which is kind of amazing. They look at DNA. DNA is this tiny stuff inside every single cell in your body. Think of it like a built-in instruction manual you get from your parents. Half comes from your mom, half from your dad, and they got their DNA from their parents, and so on, back and back through time. So DNA carries this hidden family history inside it. Sometimes, if they get really lucky, scientists can find tiny little pieces of DNA still hanging on in very old bones dug up from Paleo-Indian sites. It's tough work. Bones that old are rare, and the DNA inside is usually broken down and super hard to find. But sometimes, against the odds, they manage to get a little bit. When they do, they compare this ancient DNA to the DNA of modern Native American people. And guess what they find? It matches up. The patterns in the DNA from those old bones look like the patterns in the DNA of Native American people living today. It's like finding a direct family signature, proof written right into the body. It shows a clear, direct bloodline. The Paleo-Indians are the ancestors. They are the root of the family tree that grows straight up into the Native American people living now. That family story is carried right there in the blood, passed down silently from parent to child for more generations than anyone can number. This connection isn't just some dusty history fact. It's really important. It means the story of the Paleo-Indians isn't just about old stones and footprints. It's literally the first chapter of the whole story of Native American people in this land. Knowing where those first people originally came from, over from Asia, walking across that land bridge, and how they lived, how they survived, how they slowly spread out across the continents, helps explain the incredibly deep roots Native Americans have here. It shows their family didn't arrive recently from somewhere else. Their roots go down into this soil deeper than anyone else's, back to the very first people to ever call this place home. They've been here for thousands upon thousands of years, a connection to the land that stretches back to the beginning. Understanding this huge sweep of time also helps show just how much change happened over all those centuries. The Paleo-Indian way of life, chasing mammoths with spears, moving camp constantly, making those distinct Clovis points, that was just the opening act. The very first page. Over the immense stretch of time that followed, their descendants changed and adapted in incredible ways. They figured out how to live everywhere, in scorching deserts, in thick forests, on wide open plains, along rocky coasts. They developed hundreds of unique languages. They built rich cultures, complex traditions, and deep knowledge about the land. All of that amazing diversity, all those different ways of being, grew slowly and steadily from the seeds planted by those first small bands of people walking south into a vast, unknown, and empty new world. So when we talk about the Paleo-Indians, digging up their old spear points or finding their ancient footprints, we're not just talking about forgotten history. We're talking about the great-great-great, add 1,000 more greats, grandparents of the Native American people. That journey those first people made, walking into the unknown, their struggle to find food and survive in a brand new, often harsh land, their ability to change and adapt over time, that's the foundation. The absolute bedrock beginning of a story that is still unfolding right now, today. The Paleo-Indians were the very first people here. Everyone else who came later, much, much later, arrived on a continent already full of the descendants of those first brave explorers. That's the biggest connection, the most important thing to remember. They were the first ones here, starting it all, and their family is still here, carrying that long story forward. So, we've talked a bunch about these Paleo-Indian people. They lived an incredibly long time ago, way back before anything else we know here. They walked into America when it was totally empty of other people. They hunted huge animals that don't even exist anymore. They moved around constantly, never staying put too long. They made all their tools out of stone because that's what they had. Then, slowly, the world changed around them. The ice melted, the big animals vanished, and their way of life had to change too, bit by bit, over a very long time. But honestly, why should anyone today care about some old people from way back when? What's the point of digging up their old stones? Well, there are a few pretty solid reasons. First and biggest, they were the absolute first people here. That's a huge deal just by itself. Think about it. Before them, for tens of thousands of years, no humans lived anywhere in the whole enormous stretch of North or South America. None. Zero. Then, they came. They were the very first ones to see these mountains, these giant rivers, these wide open plains. The first to walk through forests that had never seen a person before. The first to figure out how to survive in this brand new place. Everything that came later, all the people, all the different tribes, all the history that happened over thousands of years, it all started with them. They were the pioneers who opened the door to this whole huge continent. They kicked off the entire story of people living in the Americas. That fact alone makes them super important. They began everything. Secondly, they didn't just disappear like smoke. They are the real deal ancestors. Their children grew up, had their own children, and those kids had more kids, and this kept going on and on for thousands and thousands of years. Slowly, incredibly slowly, over all that immense time, those descendants became the hundreds of different Native American tribes and nations that were thriving all across the land long, long before any Europeans sailed over. All those diverse groups, with their own rich languages, cultures, and traditions, trace their family lines directly back to those first small bands of Paleo-Indian explorers. It's a direct bloodline connection. Science can even show this now using DNA, that tiny code inside every cell that carries family history passed down from parents. Scientists have found that DNA from very old Paleo-Indian bones matches the DNA of Native American people living today. So, learning about the Paleo-Indians helps everyone understand the incredibly deep roots that Native American people have in this land. Their family has been here since the absolute first beginning. Their connection goes back further than anyone else's. Third, their whole story is basically about people figuring stuff out against tough odds. They walked into a completely unknown world. Everything was new and strange. Weird, giant animals they'd never seen. Strange plants they had to test to see if they were safe. A climate that was shifting from super cold ice age conditions to something warmer. They had to adapt constantly. They had to learn what was good to eat, how to hunt different animals when the mammoths and sloths died out, where to find shelter from storms or cold. They had to make everything they needed, weapons, tools, clothes, from whatever they could find around them. Stone, bone, wood, animal skins. They had to keep moving to find food. Their story shows how humans can survive, adapt, and spread into brand new places, even really challenging ones. It's a fundamental human story of exploration and figuring out how to live. It just happened a really, really long time ago. Fourth, the little bit of stuff they left behind is like a quiet message from the deep past. It's not much, mostly just stone tools, sometimes animal bones. Very rarely something amazing like preserved footprints or the remains of an old campfire spot. But these ordinary things are actually powerful clues. Finding a Clovis point tells us clearly that people were definitely here a super long time ago. Finding cut marks on a mammoth bone proves they hunted and ate those giants. Finding footprints set in hardened mud shows us the exact spot where someone walked thousands upon thousands of years ago. These little bits of physical proof are literally all we have from that unimaginably distant time. They are the only way we know anything about the very first people to call this place home. Digging them up and carefully studying them, even though it means a lot of slow, careful work sifting through dirt and rocks, is how we piece together the very start of the human story here. Without finding those stones and bones, we simply wouldn't know this story existed at all. They are the only voices left from that time. Finally, they matter because they show just how incredibly long people have been connected to this land. Native American people aren't recent arrivals. Their roots here go straight back to these very first people who walked in. For the Paleo-Indians, this was the New World. They were the ones who explored it first, learned its secrets, figured out how to live in it, and their family has been an unbroken part of it ever since. Understanding the Paleo-Indian story helps everyone see that the history of people in America isn't short at all. It's mind-bogglingly long. It stretches back thousands upon thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down, before cities were built, before farms were planted. It all began with small groups of people walking slowly south across a huge land, carrying their few stone tools, always searching for the next meal, and becoming the very first to call this vast place home. That deep, long connection is fundamentally important. It's the true foundation. Knowing about the Paleo-Indians reminds us that the story of people here is much, much older than many folks realize. They were the absolute beginning, and the legacy of their journey and survival is still here, woven into the land and its first peoples. The idea of a water path across Central America between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans is very old. In 1513, a Spanish explorer named Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the narrow land in Panama. He became the first European to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. This showed the land connection was possible. Soon after, in 1534, the Spanish King Charles V ordered a study. He wanted to see if a canal could be built in Panama. The study found it was too difficult with the tools and knowledge available then. For the next 300 years, the idea mostly stayed an idea. Building a canal was too big and hard. Spain did not try seriously again. The land belonged to Spain until the early 1800s. Then the countries of Central America became independent. Interest in a canal grew again later in the 1800s. One big reason was the California gold rush starting in 1848. Many people from the east coast of the United States wanted to go to California quickly. Going by ship around South America took a very long time and was dangerous. A shorter route was needed. This led to the building of the Panama Railroad. Work started in 1850 and finished in 1855. It crossed the same narrow land in Panama. The railroad was very successful. It showed that crossing Panama was possible. It also made money by moving people and goods. The railroad proved that a major transportation link in Panama could work. It made people think a canal might also be possible. Around the same time, the United States and Great Britain signed an agreement in 1850. It was called the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty. This agreement said that if a canal was ever built in Central America, both countries would protect it. Neither country would control it alone. It would be neutral, meaning open to ships from all countries. The treaty did not say where the canal should be. It just said if one was built. People argued about the best place for a canal. Panama was one possibility. Another possibility was Nicaragua. Nicaragua had big lakes that might be used as part of a canal route. It seemed easier. Teams of engineers were sent to look at both places. They studied the land, the rivers, the rocks, and the weather. They tried to figure out where it would be easier and cheaper to dig a canal. They measured distances and heights. They looked at how much dirt and rock would need to be moved. They also thought about sickness in the hot, wet climate. These early surveys in Panama and Nicaragua were important. They collected basic information about the land. They showed that building a canal would be a huge job. It would cost a lot of money. It would need new machines and ways of working. It would also be very dangerous for workers because of diseases like malaria and yellow fever, which were common in the area. No one knew how to stop these diseases then. The idea of a canal was becoming more serious. The success of the Panama Railroad showed the value of a fast route. The political agreement between the U.S. and Britain removed one obstacle. The surveys gave some facts about the two main options, Panama and Nicaragua, but no one was ready to actually start building. It still seemed too big, too expensive, and too difficult. More studies were needed. Someone with a lot of money and confidence would need to take the risk. The dream of a canal across the Americas remained just a dream for a while longer. The land waited. The idea of building a canal through Panama gained serious attention in the late 19th century. After the success of the Suez Canal in Egypt, completed in 1869, many believed a similar project could connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the French diplomat who led the Suez project, became the main promoter of the Panama Canal idea. In 1879, an international congress met in Paris to discuss the canal project. De Lesseps pushed strongly for a sea-level canal, one without locks, through Panama, despite some engineers suggesting a lock system would be better. The Congress approved his plan, and the Compagnie Universelle du Canal Interocéanique was created to build it. Work began in 1881 with great enthusiasm. The French brought modern equipment for that time, steam shovels, dredges, and railway systems to move dirt. However, they quickly encountered problems no one had fully anticipated. The tropical environment proved much harsher than in Egypt. Heavy rains caused constant landslides in the excavated areas, sometimes undoing months of work in minutes. The most serious challenge was disease. Malaria and yellow fever spread rapidly among workers. At first, no one understood these illnesses came from mosquitoes. Workers died in large numbers, sometimes hundreds in a single month. The French tried bringing in new workers from Europe and the Caribbean, but the death rate remained shockingly high. Engineering problems also mounted. The Culebra Cut, now called Gaillard Cut, where the canal needed to go through mountains, proved especially difficult. The rock was harder than expected, and landslides kept filling in the dugout areas. The French plan for a sea-level canal required removing much more material than originally calculated. Financial troubles began in 1885. The project was costing much more than planned, and progress was far slower than expected. De Lesseps kept asking investors for more money, claiming success was near. But by 1887, it became clear the sea-level plan wouldn't work. The company switched to a lock-based design, but it was too late. In 1889, the company ran out of money completely and went bankrupt. The project collapsed amid accusations of poor management and financial wrongdoing. About 20,000 workers had died during the French effort, mostly from disease. The company had spent nearly 1.5 billion francs, about $287 million then, but only completed about 40% of the excavation. The failure became a huge scandal in France known as the Panama Affair. De Lesseps and others were put on trial for fraud and mismanagement. The scandal hurt France's reputation and made investors wary of big international projects. However, the French effort wasn't completely wasted. They had built some infrastructure, completed important surveys, and excavated significant portions of the route. This work would later help the Americans when they took over the project. The French also left behind equipment and buildings that could be reused. The failed attempt taught important lessons. A sea-level canal wasn't practical in Panama. Disease control was absolutely necessary. Better organization and planning were needed. The project required much more money than originally thought. After the bankruptcy, a new French company took over the assets, but didn't continue construction. They mainly tried to keep the project alive long enough to sell it to another country. By the late 1890s, the United States became interested in taking over the canal project, seeing its potential for military and commercial use. The French period showed how difficult building the Panama Canal would be, but also proved it might be possible with better planning, more money, and solutions to the disease problems. The failed attempt scared away many investors, but paved the way for eventual success under American leadership. After the French failure, the canal project seemed dead. The French company kept its rights, but did no more work. For 10 years, nothing happened. Then, in the 1890s, the United States began looking seriously at building a canal. Two routes were possible, through Panama or through Nicaragua. A U.S. commission studied both places in 1899 to 1901. Panama had advantages. It was shorter, and the French had already done some work there. But Nicaragua had large lakes that could be part of the canal. The commission first favored Nicaragua. Then something changed their minds. Philippe Bunau-Varilla, a French engineer from the old canal company, worked hard to convince the Americans to choose Panama. He gave them information showing Nicaragua had volcanoes that could be dangerous. He also said Panama would be cheaper because of the French work already done there. In 1902, the U.S. Congress voted for Panama. The next problem was getting permission. Panama was then part of Colombia. The U.S. offered Colombia $10 million plus $250,000 yearly to allow the canal. In 1903, both countries signed the Hay-Heron Treaty, but Colombia's government refused to approve it. They wanted more money. This made Bunau-Varilla and some Panamanians angry. They saw the canal as good for Panama. With quiet support from the U.S. government, they planned to make Panama independent from Colombia. On November 3, 1903, the revolution happened. U.S. warships stopped Colombian troops from reaching Panama. Panama became independent in just 3 days with almost no fighting. The new Panama government quickly made a deal with the U.S. Bunau-Varilla, now representing Panama, signed the Hay-Bunau-Varilla Treaty on November 18, 1903. This treaty gave the U.S. control of a 10-mile wide canal zone forever, the right to build and run the canal, the right to protect the canal with military force. In return, Panama got $10 million and $250,000 per year. Many Panamanians later felt this treaty was unfair. The U.S. got much more than they had offered Colombia, but at the time, the new government accepted it. They needed U.S. support and wanted the canal built. With the treaty signed, the U.S. could now start work. They bought the French company's equipment and land for $40 million. This included the unfinished canal, buildings, railroads, and tools. The total cost so far was high, but less than starting from nothing. The U.S. government created the Isthmian Canal Commission to manage the project. They needed to decide how to build the canal. The French sea level plan had failed. Now engineers favored a lock canal, using dams to create lakes and locks to raise and lower ships. This would require less digging than cutting all the way through at sea level. Before construction could start, two big problems needed solving: disease malaria and yellow fever still killed many people. Organization. The French effort had been poorly managed. The U.S. appointed John Findlay Wallace as the first chief engineer in 1904. But he faced many difficulties. The work sites were disorganized. Equipment from France was old or broken. Worker housing was inadequate. Worst of all, disease continued to kill many workers. After 1 year, little progress had been made. Many Americans began to doubt the project could succeed. Something needed to change. In 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt appointed a new chief engineer, John Stevens, and a new doctor, William Gorgas. These two men would transform the canal project. The events of 1903 were crucial. The quick revolution, the new treaty, and the U.S. takeover set the stage for successful construction. But major challenges remained. The next years would show whether the Americans could succeed where the French had failed. They needed to solve the disease problem, organize the massive project, and actually build the canal, all in one of the most difficult work environments in the world. The American effort to build the Panama Canal began slowly in 1904. The first year showed little progress as the new team faced the same problems that defeated the French. Workers continued dying from disease, equipment broke down frequently, and the tropical environment made work extremely difficult. The initial approach of continuing where the French left off proved unsuccessful. John Stevens became the new chief engineer in 1905 and changed everything. He understood that before any real construction could begin, the basic problems needed solving. The first priority was controlling the diseases that killed so many workers. Dr. William Gorgas received full support to implement his mosquito control program. Workers drained swamps where mosquitoes bred, sprayed oil on standing water, and installed screens in living quarters. These simple measures virtually eliminated yellow fever within a year and greatly reduced malaria cases. At the same time, Stevens improved living conditions for the workforce. He built proper housing with screened windows, established clean water systems, and created hospitals with trained medical staff. Cafeterias served tens of thousands of meals daily. These changes made Panama a safer place to work and attracted more laborers to the project. The workforce grew from a few thousand to over 30,000 at the project's peak. Stevens also made the crucial decision to abandon the French sea-level canal plan. Instead, he proposed using a system of locks and creating a large artificial lake. This required building a massive dam across the Chagres River to form Gatun Lake, which would serve as the canal's main waterway. Ships would be raised and lowered through 3 sets of locks at each end of the canal. This design significantly reduced the amount of excavation needed compared to the French approach. Actual construction began in earnest after these preparations. The work divided into several major components. Building the Gatun Dam required moving enormous amounts of earth and rock. The dam created what was then the world's largest artificial lake. Workers constructed the locks using concrete poured on site. The locks used a system of gates and chambers to raise and lower ships between sea level and the lake level. The most challenging section was the Culebra Cut, later renamed Gaillard Cut. This 8-mile stretch required digging through the Continental Divide. Workers used steam shovels and dynamite to remove rock and soil, which trains then carried away. The sides of the cut kept sliding down, requiring constant re-excavation. Engineers eventually solved this by making the slopes less steep. The project became highly organized under Stevens's leadership. Trains moved materials precisely where needed. Workshops repaired equipment around the clock. A telegraph system coordinated work across the entire canal zone. When Stevens unexpectedly resigned in 1907, President Roosevelt appointed Army engineer George Goethals to complete the project. Goethals maintained the efficient systems Stevens had established. By 1913, all major components were complete. The locks had been tested, Gatun Lake filled with water, and the Culebra Cut finally stabilized. On October 10, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson triggered the explosion that removed the last barrier between the oceans. The first official ship passed through the completed canal on August 15, 1914, just as World War I began in Europe. The American effort took 10 years and cost $375 million. About 5,600 workers died during construction, far fewer than during the French attempt. The completed canal stretched 50 miles from coast to coast. It included 3 main sets of locks at each end and the massive Gatun Lake in the middle. The minimum depth was 41 feet, allowing most ocean-going ships of the time to pass through. The Panama Canal's completion represented a major engineering achievement. Where the French had failed, the Americans succeeded through careful planning and systematic problem-solving. They first controlled the diseases that killed workers, then organized the massive project efficiently, and finally built the canal using practical engineering solutions. The canal immediately became vital for global shipping, providing a safe shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans that changed world trade patterns permanently. The Panama Canal opened for business on August 15, 1914, but its early years of operation faced unexpected challenges. The timing coincided with the start of World War I in Europe, which immediately reduced international shipping traffic. Many commercial ships stayed in home waters due to wartime dangers, while naval vessels focused on military operations rather than using the new canal. This meant the canal's economic impact took several years to materialize fully. Initial operations revealed practical issues needing adjustment. The locks worked as designed, but required fine-tuning of procedures. Canal pilots needed time to develop expertise handling different ship types through the narrow channels. The original plan called for ships to pass through in about 12 hours, but early transits often took longer as crews adapted to the new system. Within a few years, the average transit time improved to about 8 hours as operations became more efficient. Maintenance emerged as a constant challenge. The tropical environment caused rapid wear on equipment. Saltwater corrosion affected metal parts, while humidity damaged electrical systems. The canal workforce transitioned from construction to maintenance roles, constantly repairing and replacing components. Landslides in the Culebra Cut remained a problem, requiring ongoing dredging to keep the channel clear. These operational realities made the canal more expensive to run than initially projected. Traffic through the canal grew steadily after the war ended in 1918. Shipping companies gradually adapted their routes to take advantage of the shorter passage. The canal particularly benefited trade between the U.S. East Coast and Asia, saving ships the long journey around South America. By the 1920s, about 5,000 ships were using the canal annually. This number would continue rising as global trade expanded. The canal's operation became a model of efficiency under U.S. management. A strict schedule ensured smooth traffic flow in both directions. Ships arrived at designated times and moved through the system without unnecessary delays. The canal employed about 4,000 workers during this period, many of whom lived in this canal zone with their families. The zone developed into a small American community with schools, hospitals, and recreational facilities. Relations between the U.S. and Panama showed early signs of strain during this period. Many Panamanians felt excluded from the economic benefits of the canal. The 1903 treaty gave the U.S. control over the canal zone, which became essentially American territory cutting through Panama. Disputes arose over wages for Panamanian workers and the zone's boundaries. These tensions would continue growing over the decades. Technological changes affected canal operations during the 1920s and 1930s. The shift from coal to oil-powered ships reduced the need for coaling stations in the zone. Larger ships began appearing, testing the canal's original size limits. The maximum ship size that could fit through became known as Panamax, setting a standard for shipbuilders worldwide. Some vessels had to be designed specifically to meet these size restrictions. The canal's military importance became clear during this period. U.S. naval ships could move quickly between oceans, strengthening American defense capabilities. The canal zone housed military bases that protected the waterway. This strategic value made the U.S. determined to maintain control, even as calls for Panamanian involvement grew louder. Economic changes in the 1930s affected canal traffic. The Great Depression reduced global trade, leading to fewer ships passing through. At the same time, competition emerged as some shipping lines found alternative routes more economical, despite being longer. These fluctuations showed that the canal's success depended on broader economic conditions beyond local control. By the late 1930s, the canal had settled into a stable operational routine. The initial technical problems had been solved, and traffic flows became predictable. However, new challenges loomed as ships continued growing larger and international tensions rose again in the lead-up to World War II. The canal's first quarter-century of operation proved its value, but also revealed limitations that would need addressing in future years. The stage was set for new developments as world conditions changed and technology advanced. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 changed the importance of the Panama Canal. As global conflict spread, the canal became a key military asset for the United States. The ability to move warships quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific was vital for defense. The U.S. government increased security along the canal, adding troops and anti-aircraft guns. Barbed wire fences appeared around critical areas. Blackout rules were enforced at night to protect against potential air attacks. Shipping traffic through the canal increased during the war years. Military vessels received priority, often causing delays for commercial ships. The canal workforce operated around the clock to keep the waterway open. Despite fears, no direct attacks occurred on the canal during the war. Its safe operation helped the Allied war effort by allowing rapid movement of ships and supplies between theaters of war. After the war ended in 1945, canal operations returned to normal. Commercial shipping traffic grew as global trade recovered. The U.S. maintained a strong military presence at the Canal Zone, which now included several bases. The zone had become a permanent American community, with schools, stores, and housing for workers and military families. Life in the zone followed American customs, creating a small piece of the U.S. in the middle of Panama. Relations between the U.S. and Panama grew more difficult during this period. Many Panamanians felt their country was not benefiting enough from the canal. The 1903 treaty gave Panama only a small annual payment, while the U.S. controlled the zone and collected all tolls. Protests became more common, with Panamanians arguing the treaty was unfair. In 1947, plans to establish new U.S. military bases outside the Canal Zone caused large protests, forcing the U.S. to abandon the idea. The 1950s saw rising nationalism in Panama. Students and workers held demonstrations demanding changes to the Canal Agreement. The most serious incident occurred in 1959 when Panamanians entered the Canal Zone to plant their national flag. U.S. troops stopped them, leading to violent clashes. These events showed growing frustration with American control of the canal. At the same time, the canal faced operational challenges. Ship sizes continued increasing, with some vessels barely fitting through the locks. Maintenance costs rose as the infrastructure aged. The original locks, now over 40 years old, needed constant repairs. Engineers began studying ways to modernize the canal to handle larger ships, but no major improvements were made during this period. The U.S. government made small changes to address Panamanian concerns. In 1955, a new treaty increased the annual payment to Panama and gave Panamanian workers in the zone better wages. However, the key issue of sovereignty over the Canal Zone remained unresolved. Panamanian leaders continued pushing for greater control over the waterway running through their country. By the end of the 1950s, it was clear the status quo could not last. The original 1903 treaty had been made when Panama was a newly independent nation with little bargaining power. Now, with decolonization movements growing worldwide and Panama's economy developing, demands for change became stronger. The stage was set for difficult negotiations about the canal's future. The canal itself continued operating efficiently during these years. Traffic steadily increased, and toll revenue grew. The waterway had become essential for global trade, particularly for oil shipments from Alaska and goods moving between the U.S. East Coast and Asia. But political pressures and physical limitations both signaled that changes would be necessary in the coming decades. The question was no longer whether the canal would change, but how and when those changes would happen. During these 2 decades, the Panama Canal remained under firm U.S. control, but the foundations of that control were weakening. The military importance shown during World War II gave way to commercial dominance in peacetime, while political challenges from Panama grew steadily stronger. The next years would see these tensions lead to major changes in the canal's management and ownership. The 1960s marked the start of major changes in the Panama Canal's ownership and operation. Growing political pressure from Panama forced the United States to reconsider its control of the waterway. In 1960, President Dwight Eisenhower took the first step by ordering the Panamanian flag to be flown alongside the American flag in the Canal Zone. This small symbolic gesture acknowledged Panama's claims over the territory. 4 years later, a more serious conflict erupted. In January 1964, Panamanian students entered the Canal Zone to raise their flag at a high school. A scuffle broke out with American students, leading to riots that spread across Panama City. The violence lasted 4 days, leaving more than 20 Panamanians and 4 Americans dead. The incident became known as Martyrs' Day in Panama and forced both countries to address the canal issue seriously. Negotiations began in 1965 but progressed slowly. The main sticking point was Panama's demand for full control of the canal, while the U.S. wanted to maintain operational authority. Talks stalled several times as neither side would compromise on these core positions. Meanwhile, the canal continued operating normally, with traffic increasing each year as global trade expanded. A breakthrough came in 1974 when the U.S. agreed to negotiate new treaties that would eventually transfer the canal to Panama. The talks lasted nearly 3 years, facing opposition from American conservatives who believed the U.S. should keep the canal permanently. In Panama, some groups demanded immediate transfer without conditions. The negotiations finally produced results in 1977 when President Jimmy Carter and Panamanian leader Omar Torrijos signed 2 new treaties. The first treaty stated the canal would be transferred to Panama on December 31, 1999. The second guaranteed the canal's permanent neutrality, allowing all nations to use it peacefully. The U.S. Senate narrowly approved the treaties after heated debate, with many senators concerned about giving up American control. Implementation of the treaties began in 1979. The Canal Zone ceased to exist as a U.S. territory, with most land returned to Panama. A new agency called the Panama Canal Commission took over canal operations, with joint American-Panamanian management. The transition period aimed to prepare Panama for full control by training local workers and transferring technical knowledge. During these years, the canal faced operational challenges. The waterway's infrastructure was aging, with some components over 60 years old. Maintenance costs rose as engineers worked to keep the original locks functioning. Shipping patterns changed as container ships grew larger, with many now too big for the canal's dimensions. Some business was lost to alternative routes, though the canal remained vital for certain trades. The political changes affected the thousands of Americans living and working in the former Canal Zone. Many chose to leave as U.S. government jobs were phased out. Schools and military bases began closing, marking the end of the American community that had existed since 1904. Panama took over these facilities, converting some for new uses while others were abandoned. Economic studies during this period examined the canal's future under Panamanian control. Experts predicted the waterway could remain profitable if properly maintained and modernized. However, questions remained about Panama's ability to manage such a complex operation without American expertise. The transition period was designed to address these concerns through training and shared management. By the end of the 1970s, the process of transferring the canal was underway, but far from complete. The next 2 decades would determine whether Panama could successfully take over this engineering marvel that had been under American control for 75 years. The treaties had set the course, but many practical challenges remained before the final handover at the century's end. The Panama Canal operates as a vital pathway for global shipping. It is managed entirely by the Panama Canal Authority, an organization belonging to the government of Panama. Following the completion of the major expansion project in 2016, the canal possesses the capability to accommodate significantly larger ships. These very large ships are categorized under the term Neo-Panamax. Neo-Panamax vessels can transport substantially greater quantities of cargo, including standard shipping containers, bulk commodities like grain, and specialized shipments such as liquefied natural gas, LNG. The original, smaller locks constructed during the initial building phase over a century ago continue to function reliably. They operate alongside the newer, much larger locks that were added during the recent expansion project. This dual system allows the canal to serve a wider variety of vessel sizes and types efficiently. The canal's fundamental purpose remains providing a crucial shortcut. It creates a direct link between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. This link saves ships an immense amount of time and distance compared to the alternative route. Sailing around the southernmost point of South America, Cape Horn. That southern route is not only much longer, but also poses greater risks due to challenging weather and sea conditions. Statistics indicate that approximately 6% of the world's total cargo ship movements utilize the Panama Canal annually. This represents a significant portion of international trade volume. Each year, the canal facilitates the transit of many thousands of ships. The goods transported through the canal are diverse, encompassing manufactured products packed in shipping containers, automobiles and other vehicles, various fuels including crude oil, refined petroleum products, and liquefied natural gas, agricultural products such as grains and soybeans, and raw materials like coal. Ships registered in or carrying cargo destined for the United States, China, Chile, and Japan are among the most frequent users of the canal route. The operation of the canal generates substantial revenue for the nation of Panama. The fees collected from shipping companies for using the canal constitute a major component of Panama's national income and government budget. The calculation of these transit fees is based primarily on the size of the vessel and the type of cargo it is carrying. For the largest Neo-Panamax ships, particularly container carriers and LNG tankers, the fee for a single transit can reach several $100,000. This significant income stream is vital for Panama's overall economy. It funds not only the ongoing operation and maintenance of the canal itself, but also contributes financially to other national development projects and public services across the country. Ensuring the smooth and reliable operation of the canal involves addressing persistent challenges. A primary concern is the management of water resources. The canal relies heavily on fresh water, primarily sourced from the artificial Lake Gatun, to fill the lock chambers each time a ship is raised or lowered during its transit. Lake Gatun is replenished almost entirely by rainfall within its surrounding watershed. Periods of significantly reduced rainfall, known as droughts, cause the water level in Lake Gatun to decline. When the lake level drops too low, the Canal Authority faces difficult decisions. it may become necessary to impose restrictions on the total number of ships permitted to transit each day. Alternatively, or additionally, the authority might enforce draft restrictions, limiting how deeply laden ships can be, how much cargo they can carry, to prevent them from running aground in the shallower water. These restrictions inevitably cause delays in shipping schedules and increase operational costs for shipping lines. Consequently, finding effective methods to reduce water consumption per lockage cycle and to enhance water storage capacity is a continuous operational priority. The newer locks incorporate a water-saving basin system designed to reuse a portion of the water from each lockage, which helps mitigate this challenge, but does not eliminate it. Maintaining the required depth and width of the navigation channels is another constant operational task. Natural processes cause soil, silt, and sediment to erode from the land surrounding the canal and gradually accumulate within the channels. To counteract this, large specialized vessels called dredgers work regularly to remove this accumulated material. This dredging is essential to ensure the channels remain deep enough and wide enough for the safe passage of large vessels, especially the deep-draft Neo-Panamax ships. Furthermore, the mechanical components of the lock gates, the valves controlling water flow, the locomotives, mules that guide ships, and the associated infrastructure all require ongoing inspection, routine maintenance, and periodic repairs to prevent malfunctions and ensure continuous, safe operation. This maintenance work is a fundamental, non-stop aspect of canal management. Competition from alternative global shipping routes presents an external challenge. Other major maritime passages exist. The Suez Canal in Egypt offers a primary route connecting Asia and Europe. Economic factors, such as fluctuations in fuel prices, toll costs at different canals, and specific world events impacting specific regions, influence shipping companies' decisions. Sometimes, for certain voyages, particularly those originating in Asia and heading to Europe or the U.S. East Coast, the Suez Canal route might offer a shorter distance, lower overall cost, or faster transit time compared to the Panama route. Shifts in global trade patterns, such as changes in manufacturing locations or consumer demand centers, also affect the volume and direction of cargo flows potentially using the Panama Canal. Therefore, the Canal Authority must consistently focus on maintaining high levels of operational efficiency, reliability, and competitive pricing to retain its existing users and attract new shipping traffic. Proposals for constructing entirely new canals, such as one across Nicaragua, have surfaced periodically, but none have progressed beyond the planning stage due to immense financial, environmental, and technical hurdles. Additionally, the potential for shorter Arctic shipping routes, facilitated by reduced sea ice due to climate change, exists. However, the viability, safety, and year-round reliability of these northern routes remain highly uncertain and are unlikely to challenge the Panama Canal significantly in the near or medium term. Weather patterns and the broader issue of climate change introduce further complexity and risk. Changes in climate may result in more frequent or severe periods of drought within the canal's watershed, directly threatening the water supply in Lake Gatun. Conversely, increased intensity of storms or heavy rainfall events can cause flooding, landslides into the channels, or necessitate temporary closures for safety. Managing the water resources of Lake Gatun involves a delicate balance. The lake must provide sufficient water for the canal's lock operations, while also serving as a crucial source of drinking water and water for agriculture for the population living in the nearby regions. Protecting the forests and natural vegetation within the canal's watershed is critically important. These forests help regulate the flow of rainwater, reduce soil erosion that leads to sedimentation in the lake and channels, and contribute to maintaining water quality. The Canal Authority engages in watershed management programs to support this environmental protection. Looking towards the future, the Panama Canal Authority is committed to sustained investment in the waterway. This involves allocating significant financial resources for the upkeep, repair, and modernization of the existing infrastructure. Both the original locks and the newer expansion locks, as well as the channels and support facilities. Potential future projects could explore further technological or operational improvements aimed at enhancing water efficiency, increasing transit capacity where feasible, or improving resilience against climate impacts. The overarching objective is to ensure the Panama Canal remains a competitive, reliable, and indispensable link within the global maritime transportation network for decades to come. The canal is deeply intertwined with Panama's national identity and economic well-being. It continues to function as a vital connection point in international trade, requiring continuous adaptation to accommodate evolving ship sizes, changing global trade routes, and the escalating challenges presented by a changing environment. Its successful operation demands relentless attention to management, maintenance, and forward-looking planning.